Every year, when the world thinks the royal celebrations have ended and the cameras have stopped rolling, something extraordinary happens behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle. While ordinary families pack away their decorations and return to routine, King Charles III begins a series of ancient rituals that have shaped the British monarchy for centuries. These aren't the public ceremonies you see on television. These are the deeply personal, profoundly meaningful traditions that reveal the true heart of what it means to be a modern monarch carrying forward thousand-year-old customs. Some of these practices date back to medieval times, while others were created by Charles himself, blending ancient wisdom with contemporary purpose. What happens during these private post-holiday weeks determines how the entire royal year unfolds. The decisions made, the ceremonies performed, and the connections forged during this time influence everything from state policies to family relationships. This is the untold story of how a king prepares his kingdom and himself for the year ahead, honoring both the past and the future in ways that would surprise even the most devoted royal watchers. The traditions King Charles observes after the holidays aren't just quaint customs, they're the foundation upon which his reign operates, connecting him to generations of monarchs while addressing the challenges of ruling in the 21st century. The morning of January 2nd arrived grey and cold at Sandringham House, but, inside the historic Norfolk estate, King Charles III was already awake before dawn. This wasn't unusual for the monarch, who had maintained the same early rising schedule for decades, but today marked the beginning of something special. As the rest of his family slept off the previous night's festivities, Charles began what palace insiders call the Sacred Reset, a deeply personal tradition that sets the tone for his entire year. The tradition began in childhood when Charles would accompany his grandfather, King George VI, on long walks through the Sandringham estate during the post-holiday period. Even as a young boy, Charles sensed there was something different about these walks. They weren't the casual strolls he took with his grandmother or the structured activities planned by his tutors. These were pilgrimages of sorts, moments when the weight of kingship was shared between generations. George VI, who had never expected to be king until his brother abdicated, understood the burden of unexpected responsibility. He taught his grandson that the period after Christmas wasn't just about recovering from celebrations, it was about spiritual and mental preparation for the year ahead. The conversations during those winter walks shaped Charles's understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between personal desires and public service. Now, more than 70 years later, Charles continues this tradition with modifications that reflect both his personality and the changed nature of modern monarchy. His walks begin at exactly 5:30 in the morning, regardless of weather. The route varies slightly each day, but it always includes specific stops that have deep meaning for the royal family. The first stop is always the small cemetery where several beloved royal corgis are buried, a reminder of the simple joys that sustain the monarchy through difficult times. The second stop brings Charles to an ancient oak tree that has stood on the estate for over 400 years. Local legend says that Queen Elizabeth I once sheltered under this tree during a hunting expedition, and Charles uses this moment to reflect on the continuity of the monarchy. He often brings a small leather journal on these walks, recording thoughts about the challenges ahead and goals for the coming year. Palace staff have learned to recognize these journals, bound in deep green leather with the royal cipher embossed in gold. What makes these walks particularly meaningful is that Charles doesn't walk alone. He's accompanied by a rotating group of estate workers, gardeners, and long-term staff members who have served the royal family for decades. This isn't a formal procession, it's a genuine conversation between the king and the people who maintain the places he calls home. These individuals often share insights about local concerns, family struggles, and community needs that would never reach the monarch through official channels. Margaret Thompson, who has worked as head gardener at Sandringham for 32 years, recalls her first walk with then Prince Charles in 1995. She was nervous about what to say to the heir to the throne, but Charles immediately put her at ease by asking detailed questions about her work and her family. Over the years, these conversations evolved into genuine friendship, with Charles remembering the names of her children and asking about their progress in school and careers. The walks serve multiple purposes beyond personal reflection. They're intelligence-gathering missions that help Charles understand the real concerns of ordinary British citizens. Unlike the carefully scripted public engagements that fill his official calendar, these conversations happen without protocol officers or press secretaries managing the message. The result is unfiltered access to the thoughts and concerns of working-class families who form the backbone of British society. During one particularly memorable walk in January 2020, just before the pandemic changed everything, Charles spoke with Tom Bradley, a farm manager who had worked on the estate for 40 years. Bradley shared his concerns about the impact of uncertain weather patterns on crop yields and the financial pressure facing small farmers throughout the region. That conversation directly influenced Charles's later advocacy for sustainable agriculture and his support for programs helping rural communities adapt to climate change. The tradition has evolved to include what Charles calls listening stations, specific locations on the estate where he pauses to hear reports from different departments. At the stables, he receives updates on the health of the horses and the condition of the facilities. Near the main house, the household staff share observations about maintenance needs and suggestions for improving efficiency. These might seem like mundane operational details, but Charles understands that effective leadership requires attention to both grand strategy and everyday practicalities. The most emotionally significant part of these walks occurs at a small memorial garden that Charles created after his father's death in 2021. Prince Philip had been a constant presence during the post-holiday period at Sandringham, often joining Charles for early morning discussions about estate management and environmental conservation. The garden features plants that Philip particularly loved, including the rare orchids he cultivated and the native wildflowers he insisted on preserving throughout the estate grounds. Charles spends several minutes at this memorial each morning, sometimes speaking aloud to his father about the decisions facing the monarchy. Staff members who have witnessed these moments describe them as deeply moving, with the king seeking guidance from someone who understood the unique pressures of supporting the sovereign while maintaining an independent identity. These conversations help Charles process his own role as both king and father, balancing the needs of the institution with his desire to support his sons as they navigate their own relationships with royal duty. The walks conclude at a small chapel on the estate grounds, where Charles spends time in private prayer and meditation. This isn't part of any official religious ceremony, it's a personal spiritual practice that helps him center himself for the challenges ahead. The chapel, built in the 18th century, contains artifacts from centuries of royal history, including prayer books used by previous monarchs and memorial tablets honoring family members who served the crown with distinction. Palace sources reveal that Charles often writes letters during this chapel time, though the recipients of these letters remain strictly confidential. Some speculate that he writes to heads of state, sharing his vision for international cooperation in the coming year. Others believe the letters go to family members, expressing hopes for healing relationships and strengthening bonds that have been strained by public scrutiny and personal disagreements. What emerges from these morning walks is a detailed understanding of Charles's approach to kingship. Unlike previous monarchs who relied primarily on official briefings and formal reports, Charles seeks direct connection with the people and places that make up his realm. He understands that effective leadership in the modern era requires emotional intelligence and genuine empathy, qualities that can't be developed through traditional royal education but must be cultivated through real relationships with real people. The impact of these walks extends far beyond personal reflection. Ideas generated during these conversations often find their way into royal initiatives and charitable programs. The Prince's Trust, Charles's youth development charity, has funded dozens of projects suggested by estate workers and their families. Environmental initiatives promoted by the Royal Foundation often trace their origins to observations made during these early morning explorations of the Sandringham grounds. Charles's commitment to this tradition remained unbroken even during the most challenging periods of his life. After Diana's death in 1997, when the monarchy faced unprecedented criticism and scrutiny, Charles continued his walks, finding solace and strength in the routine and the honest conversations with people who knew him as more than just a public figure. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when the royal family was required to isolate, Charles adapted the tradition to include virtual conversations with staff members, demonstrating his dedication to maintaining these important connections even under extraordinary circumstances. The tradition represents something larger than personal habit, it embodies Charles's understanding of monarchy as service rather than privilege. By beginning each year with direct engagement with the people who serve the crown, he reinforces the idea that his role exists to support and strengthen the communities he represents. These walks aren't about maintaining distance or asserting authority, they're about building relationships that help him understand how to use his position most effectively. As Charles returns to the main house each morning, the information and insights gathered during his walks begin to shape his plans for the year ahead. The concerns shared by estate workers influence his choice of charities to support and causes to champion. The observations about environmental changes guide his advocacy for conservation and sustainable practices. The personal stories of struggle and triumph remind him of the real impact that royal attention and resources can have on individual lives and entire communities. This sacred reset period, hidden from public view but fundamental to Charles's approach to kingship, reveals the thoughtful preparation that underlies effective leadership. By the time the official royal calendar resumes and the public engagements begin, Charles has already grounded himself in the realities faced by his subjects and prepared his heart and mind for another year of service. The second week of January brings one of the most mysterious and least understood traditions in the modern royal calendar. Deep within Windsor Castle, in a chamber that few outsiders have ever seen, King Charles III participates in what palace historians call the ancient blessing ceremony. This ritual, dating back to the medieval period, represents the spiritual foundation upon which the British monarchy rests, connecting the current king to centuries of predecessors who sought divine guidance for their reigns. The ceremony takes place in the Garter throne room, but not in the ornate space that visitors see during public tours. Behind a hidden panel lies a smaller, more intimate chamber where the walls are lined with ancient tapestries depicting the history of Christian monarchy in Britain. The room contains artifacts that have been used in royal blessing ceremonies for over 600 years, including a silver chalice that belonged to Henry V and illuminated manuscripts created by monks specifically for royal use. Charles learned about this tradition from his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, during the early years of her reign. She had discovered references to the ceremony in palace archives and worked with leading historians and theologians to reconstruct what had been lost during the turbulent periods of the English Civil War and the two World Wars. The ceremony as Charles now practices it combines authentic historical elements with modern adaptations that reflect contemporary understanding of faith and service. The ritual begins before sunrise on January 10, a date chosen because it falls after the Feast of the Epiphany but before the official royal calendar resumes. Charles fasts for 24 hours before the ceremony, following a tradition that emphasizes spiritual preparation over physical comfort. This isn't a dramatic fast. He maintains his normal water intake and takes any necessary medications, but it serves as a reminder that leadership requires sacrifice and self-discipline. 3 key figures participate in the ceremony alongside the king. The first is the Dean of Windsor, who serves as the primary spiritual guide and ensures that the religious elements of the ceremony are conducted properly. The second is the Keeper of the Royal Archives, who brings historical documents that connect the current ceremony to its medieval origins. The third participant is perhaps the most interesting, a representative of the common people, chosen annually from among the household staff who have demonstrated exceptional service and character. This year, the common representative was Mary Sullivan, a housekeeper who has worked at Windsor Castle for 28 years. Mary had no idea she would be chosen until 3 days before the ceremony, when she received a personal invitation from the king. Palace sources reveal that Charles spends considerable time each year selecting this representative, looking for someone whose life story embodies the values he hopes to promote during his reign. Mary's journey to Windsor Castle began in Ireland, where she grew up in a family that struggled financially but maintained strong values of hard work and community service. She immigrated to Britain in her 20s, started as a junior cleaning staff member, and gradually worked her way up to supervising an entire wing of the castle. Her colleagues describe her as someone who treats everyone with dignity, regardless of their position, and who consistently goes beyond her required duties to help others succeed. The ceremony itself unfolds in 3 distinct phases, each carrying deep symbolic meaning. The first phase involves the reading of historical documents that remind the king of the promises made by previous monarchs. These aren't just the formal coronation oaths that the public knows about, they're personal commitments recorded in private journals and letters, revealing the private struggles and victories of kings and queens who faced challenges similar to those confronting the modern monarchy. One particularly powerful document read during the ceremony is a letter written by Queen Victoria in 1842, during a period when she questioned whether the monarchy could survive the rapid social changes brought by industrialization. Victoria wrote about her fears that the royal family was becoming irrelevant, and her determination to find new ways to serve her people despite the changing world around her. Charles often mentions how this letter resonates with his own concerns about the monarchy's place in the 21st century. The second phase of the ceremony focuses on blessing specific aspects of the king's work in the coming year. Unlike a general blessing for good health and prosperity, this ritual addresses the particular challenges that the monarchy faces. There are blessings for wisdom in making difficult decisions, courage in addressing controversial issues, and patience in dealing with criticism and opposition. Each blessing is accompanied by the lighting of a specific candle, creating a visual reminder of the spiritual support surrounding the king's earthly responsibilities. The most emotionally intensive part of this phase involves prayers for the royal family members, including those who have died and those who are currently estranged. Charles includes prayers for his late parents, asking for their continued guidance in his decisions. He also prays for his sons and their families, seeking healing for any divisions that may exist and strength to support them in their own journeys. These prayers often move him to tears, revealing the deeply personal cost of living life in the public eye. The third and final phase of the ceremony is perhaps the most unique aspect of the entire tradition. Charles personally washes the feet of the common representative, following the example of Christ washing the feet of his disciples. This isn't performed for symbolic effect or public relations value, it happens in complete privacy, witnessed only by the dean and the archivist. The act serves as a powerful reminder that kingship is fundamentally about service, not privilege. Mary Sullivan later described the foot washing as the most humbling experience of her life. She had expected to feel awkward or embarrassed, but instead felt overwhelmed by the genuine humility and gratitude that Charles expressed. He thanked her not just for her service to the royal household, but for representing the millions of people who work quietly and faithfully to keep British society functioning. The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour, with Charles asking detailed questions about Mary's experiences as an immigrant and her observations about how the monarchy could better serve diverse communities. Following the ceremony, Charles spends time alone in the chamber, reflecting on the commitments he has renewed and the guidance he has received. Palace insiders report that he often writes extensively during this time, recording his thoughts about the year ahead and any insights that emerged during the ceremony. These writings are kept in a private archive that only Charles and future monarchs will ever see, creating a continuing dialogue between rulers across the centuries. The impact of the ceremony extends well beyond the immediate spiritual experience. Charles consistently reports that the blessing ceremony helps him approach controversial decisions with greater confidence and clarity. When facing criticism about his environmental advocacy or his positions on social issues, he draws strength from the reminder that his role involves moral leadership, not just ceremonial functions. The ceremony also influences Charles's approach to public engagements throughout the year. The foot-washing ritual reminds him that every interaction with citizens represents an opportunity to serve rather than be served. Palace staff notice that Charles is particularly attentive to service workers and maintenance staff during public events, often taking time to acknowledge their contributions when protocols would normally keep them invisible. One unexpected outcome of the ceremony has been its influence on Charles's relationship with other faith communities. While the blessing ceremony itself is deeply Christian in nature, the experience of seeking divine guidance for leadership has made Charles more understanding of how other religious traditions approach questions of service and responsibility. He has become more effective in his role as defender of the faith precisely because he understands faith as a lived experience rather than just a ceremonial title. The ceremony has evolved slightly since Charles became king, reflecting his personal spiritual journey and the unique challenges of his reign. He has added prayers specifically addressing climate change and environmental destruction, recognizing these as moral issues that require spiritual as well as practical responses. He has also included prayers for international peace and cooperation, acknowledging Britain's role in addressing global challenges that no single nation can solve alone. The selection process for the common representative has become an annual highlight for palace staff, who understand that being chosen represents not just personal recognition but an opportunity to influence the king's understanding of contemporary life. Previous representatives have included a security guard who immigrated from Afghanistan, a kitchen worker who has raised 6 children while working full-time, and a maintenance supervisor who has volunteered with homeless shelters for 20 years. The historical research component of the ceremony continues to yield surprising discoveries about previous monarchs and their private spiritual practices. Recent archival work has revealed that several medieval kings maintained personal prayer books with handwritten notes about their fears and hopes for their reigns. These discoveries help Charles understand that the challenges he faces balancing tradition with innovation, managing public criticism, and finding meaning in ceremonial duties have been faced by every effective monarch throughout British history. The ceremony concludes with Charles receiving a small token that he carries throughout the year as a reminder of the commitments he has made. This year, following the theme of service to diverse communities, he chose a simple wooden cross carved from timber grown on the Windsor estate. The cross was crafted by refugees participating in a job training program supported by one of his charities, connecting his spiritual commitment to practical action in the world. As January progresses and the official royal calendar resumes, the influence of the blessing ceremony becomes apparent in Charles's approach to his duties. He seems more centered and purposeful in his public appearances, more willing to address difficult topics, and more generous in his interactions with people from all walks of life. The ceremony provides a spiritual anchor that keeps him grounded in his deepest values even when external pressures might pull him toward more expedient choices. The ancient blessing ceremony represents the hidden spiritual dimension of modern monarchy, revealing how personal faith and public service can work together to create effective leadership. By maintaining this deeply private tradition, Charles demonstrates his understanding that true authority comes not from position or privilege, but from a genuine commitment to serve others with humility and grace. Every January 15th, in the quiet hours between official duties, King Charles III engages in one of his most personal and forward-thinking traditions. Armed with his grandfather's fountain pen and seated at a desk that once belonged to Queen Victoria, he begins writing a series of letters that won't be opened for decades. These letters to tomorrow represent his attempt to communicate across time with future generations, sharing insights about the challenges of his era and offering guidance to descendants who will face problems he can only imagine. The tradition began in 1978 when Charles, then Prince of Wales, was struggling with questions about his future role and wondering whether the monarchy would remain relevant in the rapidly changing world. During a particularly difficult period of public criticism, he discovered a letter written by his great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria to future members of the royal family. Victoria had written the letter in 1887, during her Golden Jubilee year, attempting to share what she had learned about leadership and service with royals who would live in the 20th century. Victoria's letter proved remarkably prescient. She had anticipated many of the challenges that would face the monarchy, including the growth of democratic movements, the decline of imperial power, and the rise of mass media. More importantly, her letter revealed the personal cost of royal service and the strategies she had developed for maintaining dignity and purpose despite constant scrutiny. Reading her words, Charles realized he had inherited not just titles and responsibilities, but also the wisdom of generations who had navigated similar struggles. Inspired by Victoria's example, Charles began his own letter-writing tradition, initially focusing on environmental issues that he believed would become increasingly important as the decades passed. His early letters predicted many of the climate challenges that now dominate international discussions, but they also revealed his evolution as a thinker and leader. The letters from the 1980s show a young man passionate about environmental protection but sometimes uncertain about how to balance activism with royal protocol. The tradition has evolved significantly since Charles became king. His letters now address a broader range of issues, reflecting his expanded responsibilities and deeper understanding of the monarchy's role. Recent letters have focused on questions of social inequality, technological disruption, and the changing nature of international relationships. Each letter represents hours of careful thought about trends that may not become visible to the general public for years or decades. Charles writes multiple types of letters during this January tradition. The first category consists of letters to his direct descendants, William, George, Charlotte, and Louis, sharing personal reflections about the burdens and privileges of royal life. These letters contain advice about handling criticism, maintaining family relationships under public scrutiny, and finding personal fulfillment while serving institutional needs. They also include stories about previous generations of royals, preserving family history that might otherwise be lost. The letter Charles wrote to Prince George in 2024, to be opened when George turns 30, reflects on the challenge of growing up under constant media attention. Charles shared his own experiences of feeling isolated during childhood and the strategies he developed for maintaining authentic relationships despite the artificial environment created by royal protocol. He wrote about the importance of surrounding himself with people who valued him as a person rather than just as a public figure, and he encouraged George to seek out mentors and friends who would challenge his thinking and support his growth. The second category of letters addresses future monarchs more generally, regardless of whether they are Charles's direct descendants. These letters focus on institutional knowledge and strategic thinking about the monarchy's evolution. Charles writes about the delicate balance between tradition and adaptation, sharing specific examples of times when he chose to break with precedent and the results of those decisions. These letters serve as a kind of royal textbook, offering practical guidance about managing the unique pressures of constitutional monarchy. One particularly detailed letter, written in 2023, addresses the question of how the monarchy should respond to republican movements and declining support for hereditary privilege. Rather than defending the status quo, Charles honestly examines the valid criticisms of monarchical systems and suggests ways that future royals might address these concerns while preserving the institution's beneficial functions. The letter reveals his belief that the monarchy's survival depends on its ability to demonstrate genuine value to society rather than simply relying on historical precedent. The third category consists of letters to British society as a whole, expressing Charles's hopes and concerns for the nation's future. These letters are written as if addressing citizens 50 or 100 years in the future, sharing his observations about current social trends and his predictions about how they might develop. Charles writes about the challenges facing democracy in an age of social media, the need for greater social cohesion in an increasingly diverse society, and the importance of maintaining cultural traditions while embracing beneficial changes. His 2025 letter to future British citizens reflects deeply on the refugee crisis and immigration challenges that have shaped political discourse during his reign. Charles wrote about his meetings with immigrant families and his observations about how newcomers often embody traditional British values more strongly than some native-born citizens. He expressed hope that future generations would find ways to celebrate diversity while maintaining social unity, drawing on Britain's long history of successfully integrating different cultures and traditions. Charles also writes letters to international leaders and global citizens, sharing his perspective on challenges that transcend national boundaries. These letters reflect his decades of experience in diplomatic relationships and his understanding of how personal connections between leaders can influence international cooperation. He writes about the importance of building trust across cultural and political divides, sharing specific examples of relationships that helped resolve conflicts or advance mutual understanding. The environmental letters represent the largest category in Charles's collection. These documents chronicle his evolving understanding of climate change and environmental degradation, from his early focus on organic farming and architectural preservation to his current advocacy for comprehensive sustainability programs. The letters reveal his frustration with the slow pace of environmental progress, but also his hope that future generations will develop technologies and social systems that successfully address these challenges. His 2024 environmental letter describes his vision of a future Britain powered entirely by renewable energy, with cities designed around sustainable transportation and buildings that actively improve rather than damage their surrounding ecosystems. Charles writes about specific innovations he has observed, from vertical farming techniques to carbon capture technologies, expressing optimism that human creativity can solve the environmental problems that human activity has created. The personal cost of maintaining these traditions appears clearly in Charles's private letters to himself, documents he writes to process his own emotions and experiences as king. These letters reveal the loneliness that often accompanies high office, the difficulty of maintaining authentic relationships when every interaction carries political implications, and the challenge of staying true to personal convictions while representing an institution with conservative traditions. One powerful example is the letter Charles wrote to himself in January 2024, reflecting on his first full year as king. He wrote honestly about his grief over his mother's death and his anxiety about living up to her example. He also shared his pride in specific accomplishments, including successful diplomatic missions and domestic initiatives that addressed real problems faced by British families. These personal letters serve as a form of emotional record-keeping, helping him process experiences that he cannot discuss openly with anyone else. The letter-writing process itself has become deeply meaningful to Charles. He uses specific materials that connect him to royal history: paper made from trees grown on royal estates, ink mixed according to formulas used by previous monarchs, and sealing wax bearing the royal cipher. The physical act of handwriting, in an age dominated by digital communication, represents his commitment to personal connection across time. Charles stores the completed letters in a specially designed archive within Windsor Castle, organized by date and category for easy access by future readers. The archive includes detailed instructions about when each letter should be opened and who should have access to different categories of correspondence. Some letters are marked for release only after Charles's death, while others are designed to be opened during specific future events or crises. The tradition has influenced Charles's approach to contemporary leadership in unexpected ways. The process of writing to future generations forces him to think beyond immediate political pressures and consider the long-term consequences of current decisions. When facing difficult choices, he often asks himself how he will explain these decisions to future royals and citizens, encouraging him to act based on principles rather than expedience. The letters have also affected Charles's relationship with other world leaders, many of whom have expressed interest in the tradition after learning about it during private conversations. Several leaders have begun their own versions of future-focused correspondence, creating an informal network of documents that may provide future historians with unique insights into early 21st century leadership challenges. Palace staff report that Charles often refers to previous year's letters when making current decisions, treating his own past thoughts as a form of consultation with someone who understood the pressures of his position. This self-dialogue across time helps him maintain consistency in his values and approach while adapting to changing circumstances and new information. The Letters to Tomorrow tradition represents Charles's understanding that effective leadership requires both immediate responsiveness to current needs and long-term vision for future development. By regularly engaging in this forward-thinking exercise, he maintains perspective on his role in the continuing story of British monarchy and society, ensuring that his reign contributes positively to the legacy he will leave for future generations. The fourth week of January transforms King Charles III from British monarch into the symbolic head of a global family spanning 56 nations and 2.5 billion people. During this period, he undertakes what palace officials privately call the Commonwealth Connection Ritual, an intensive series of personal communications, virtual meetings, and symbolic acts designed to strengthen the bonds that hold the Commonwealth together in an era when those connections face unprecedented challenges. The ritual begins with Charles reviewing a comprehensive report prepared by Commonwealth experts, detailing political developments, economic challenges, and social changes in each member nation. Unlike the formal briefings he receives for official state visits, this report focuses on human stories that illustrate broader trends. Charles reads about a teacher in rural Jamaica who has developed innovative methods for educating children without reliable internet access, a farmer in Bangladesh who is using traditional techniques to adapt to climate change, and a young entrepreneur in Malta who is building bridges between different cultural communities. These stories aren't randomly selected. The Commonwealth Secretariat works throughout the year to identify individuals whose experiences reflect the values that Charles hopes to promote across the Commonwealth: innovation in the face of adversity, respect for cultural diversity, environmental stewardship, and commitment to democratic principles. By focusing on specific people rather than abstract statistics, Charles develops a more intuitive understanding of the challenges facing Commonwealth citizens and the resources they bring to addressing these challenges. The heart of the ritual involves personal video calls with Commonwealth leaders, but these aren't the formal diplomatic exchanges that characterize official state business. Instead, Charles schedules what he calls family conversations, informal discussions designed to strengthen personal relationships that can support cooperation when official channels become strained. These conversations often last much longer than scheduled, revealing Charles's genuine interest in understanding different perspectives and his skill at building trust across cultural boundaries. One particularly meaningful conversation in January 2025 involved a lengthy discussion with the Prime Minister of Barbados about the island's recent transition to Republican status. Rather than treating this change as a rejection of the monarchy, Charles approached it as an opportunity to explore new models for Commonwealth cooperation. The conversation revealed shared concerns about climate change, economic development, and maintaining cultural identity in a globalizing world. By the end of the call, both leaders had identified specific areas where Britain and Barbados could collaborate despite the change in constitutional relationship. Charles also schedules calls with opposition leaders and civil society representatives from across the Commonwealth, recognizing that effective leadership requires understanding multiple perspectives within each nation. These conversations sometimes reveal tensions and problems that don't appear in official diplomatic channels. During a call with environmental activists in Australia, Charles learned about specific challenges facing Indigenous communities affected by mining operations, information that influenced his later advocacy for stronger Indigenous rights protections across the Commonwealth. The technological aspect of these communications reflects Charles's commitment to modernizing royal traditions without losing their essential purpose. Palace technical staff have developed secure communication systems that allow for private conversations with leaders in nations where government surveillance might compromise honest dialogue. Charles has also learned to use virtual reality technology for more immersive cultural experiences, visiting important sites in Commonwealth nations that he cannot physically reach due to scheduling constraints or security concerns. One of the most innovative aspects of the Commonwealth Connection ritual involves Charles's participation in virtual cultural ceremonies from member nations. Last January, he joined a traditional blessing ceremony in Papua New Guinea, participating remotely as village elders performed rituals for the new year. The experience required careful coordination between palace staff and local cultural leaders to ensure that Charles's participation was respectful and meaningful rather than merely symbolic. The ceremony in Papua New Guinea proved particularly moving for Charles, who had visited the region several times but had never participated in such intimate cultural exchanges. Speaking through interpreters, he shared his own hopes for the new year and listened to concerns from community leaders about preserving traditional ways of life while adapting to modern economic realities. The conversation led to a new partnership between British environmental organizations and Papua New Guinea conservation groups, demonstrating how personal connections can generate practical cooperation. Charles's approach to Commonwealth leadership has been shaped by his understanding that the organization's survival depends on its ability to provide real value to member nations rather than simply maintaining historical connections. During his ritual review sessions, he pays particular attention to initiatives that have succeeded in addressing shared challenges across multiple Commonwealth nations. The tradition includes a specific focus on identifying and promoting Commonwealth solutions, innovations developed in one member nation that could benefit others. The 2025 ritual highlighted the success of a telemedicine program originally developed in Canada and subsequently adapted for use in remote areas of Kenya, Pakistan, and the Solomon Islands. Charles spent considerable time learning about this program's development and expansion, recognizing it as an example of how Commonwealth cooperation could address practical needs rather than simply maintaining ceremonial relationships. He later used his platform to promote similar knowledge-sharing initiatives across the organization. Educational initiatives receive special attention during the Commonwealth Connection ritual, reflecting Charles's belief that shared learning opportunities represent the most promising avenue for strengthening Commonwealth bonds. He reviews reports on student exchange programs, joint research initiatives, and collaborative online education projects that connect young people across Commonwealth nations. These programs often produce the personal relationships that sustain Commonwealth cooperation across generations. Charles was particularly impressed by a joint environmental science program involving universities in the United Kingdom, India, South Africa, and New Zealand. Students and faculty from these institutions collaborate on research projects addressing climate change impacts in different regional contexts while sharing methodologies and findings that benefit all participants. The program has produced significant scientific advances while building networks of relationships that will influence environmental policy for decades to come. The ritual also includes Charles's review of Commonwealth sporting and cultural events, recognizing their role in maintaining positive associations with Commonwealth membership. He pays attention not just to the major events like the Commonwealth Games, but to smaller cultural festivals, youth competitions, and artistic exchanges that often generate the most meaningful personal connections between Commonwealth citizens. Palace staff provide detailed reports on these events, including feedback from participants about their experiences and suggestions for improvements. Music plays a particularly important role in Charles's Commonwealth connections, reflecting his personal love of diverse musical traditions and his understanding of music's power to transcend cultural barriers. Each January, he listens to recordings of traditional music from across the Commonwealth, often discovering new artists and styles that influence his cultural programming throughout the year. Palace musicians sometimes arrange virtual sessions where Charles can interact with Commonwealth composers and performers, leading to collaborative projects that showcase the organization's cultural diversity. The economic dimension of Commonwealth relationships receives careful attention during these ritual sessions. Charles reviews reports on trade relationships, investment flows, and development assistance programs, looking for ways to strengthen economic cooperation while addressing inequality between member nations. He pays particular attention to small island developing states and least developed countries, recognizing that their continued participation in the Commonwealth depends on receiving tangible benefits from membership. One successful economic initiative that emerged from Charles's Commonwealth ritual involves linking British investment funds with sustainable development projects in smaller Commonwealth nations. By providing royal endorsement and facilitating introductions between investors and project developers, Charles has helped generate funding for renewable energy installations in the Caribbean, sustainable agriculture programs in Africa, and ecotourism development in the Pacific Islands. The environmental focus of the Commonwealth Connection ritual reflects Charles's long-standing commitment to environmental protection and his recognition that climate change represents an existential threat to many Commonwealth nations. He reviews detailed reports on environmental challenges facing different regions, from rising sea levels threatening Pacific Island nations to desertification affecting parts of Africa and Australia. These reports inform his advocacy throughout the year and help him identify opportunities for Commonwealth environmental cooperation. Charles has used his Commonwealth platform to promote innovative environmental solutions developed within member nations, helping successful approaches spread across the organization. A waste management system developed in Singapore has been adapted for use in other Commonwealth cities, while sustainable fishing techniques pioneered in the Maldives are being tested in Caribbean waters. By facilitating this knowledge transfer, Charles demonstrates the practical value of Commonwealth membership while addressing critical environmental challenges. The human dimension of Commonwealth relationships remains central to Charles's approach, reflecting his understanding that organizations survive and thrive based on the quality of personal relationships between their members. He maintains personal correspondence with hundreds of individuals across the Commonwealth, from heads of state to community organizers, creating networks of connection that support cooperation even during times of political tension. The ritual concludes with Charles recording personal messages for broadcast across Commonwealth nations, sharing his observations about shared challenges and opportunities while expressing his commitment to supporting Commonwealth cooperation. These messages are carefully crafted to acknowledge the diversity of perspectives within the Commonwealth while identifying common values and goals that can sustain collaboration across differences. The impact of the Commonwealth Connection ritual extends far beyond Charles's personal understanding of global issues. The relationships and initiatives developed during these intensive January sessions influence British foreign policy throughout the year, demonstrating how personal diplomacy can complement formal diplomatic channels. Commonwealth partners consistently report that their interactions with Charles feel more genuine and productive than traditional state-to-state negotiations, leading to stronger cooperation on issues ranging from trade to security to environmental protection. The tradition represents Charles's vision of 21st-century monarchy as a force for positive global change, using the soft power of personal relationships and moral leadership to address challenges that no single nation can solve alone. By investing time and effort in understanding and supporting Commonwealth partners, he strengthens an organization that provides alternatives to power blocks dominated by larger nations while promoting values of democracy, human rights, and sustainable development across a significant portion of the world's population.